Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. We've discussed our next topic before when we talked about Foo Fighters, those mysterious silver orbs that people have spotted, including pilots during the Second World War. Today we're going to delve a bit deeper into the UFO topic. Most people say they've seen lights in the sky that are mysterious or unidentified, and that really is what a UFO is, an unidentified flying object. It doesn't necessarily have to be an alien, although that's one explanation. Could be military craft. But anyway, we're going to talk about some events that have happened, specifically really events that have involved multiple witnesses. I'm talking about events like Phoenix Lights, Travis Walton event, Rendlesham Forest, and maybe the Zimbabwe school incident. And I'm going to go over to our academic researcher from Central Asia. He's currently 800 meters above sea level, and he's at working for a publishing company at the foot of the Himalayas, near the highest ice rink in the world. Anthony, how are things?
Things are great, Scott. It's really nice to be here.
Good, yes. It's nice to have you back. And you have been looking at the incidents involving UFOs and multiple witnesses, I believe.
I have, yeah. And look, before we get into it, I just want to kind of out myself here.
Oh my God, Anthony, that's for another show, surely.
I'm a slight skeptic on this topic.
Okay, that's fine.
So I just wanted to say that at the start. I actually find it a fascinating topic, and I have zero difficulty believing that living organisms exist on other planets. But in terms of visitations and abductions and so on, I am going to have to sound a note of skepticism. So sorry about that.
That's fine. We've always welcomed skeptical views on Truth Sentinel, and I would probably say I'm less skeptical, but then it depends on what we're talking about. I'm not skeptical about, I believe, what these people think they saw. I don't know the origins of it, but I totally believe them, and I think we should keep an open mind to it. But we can sort of delve into with the things we agree and disagree on as we discuss this topic. What was the first thing you wanted to look at?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and by the way, I don't say, when I say that, I don't say it with any kind of contempt or anything like that. And look, going back to the 90s, I was a huge X-Files fan. I do really want to believe this. It seems like it should be logical and true in many ways, but I just haven't quite been convinced yet. About a week ago, I was listening to a really interesting radio broadcast. It was of an American program called the Long John Nagle Show, and it was aired in 1958. Now, this guy, Nagle, he had a late-night show, kind of like Art Bell's original Coast to Coast. And on the episode I listened to, his guest was Arthur C. Clarke. Now, I guess most listeners have heard of Arthur C. Clarke. He's most famous as the author of 2001: A Space Odyssey. But as well as being a sci-fi author, he was a professional astronomer. And also, for 5 years, he chaired an organization called the British Interplanetary Society. So this guy was, I think we could say, a deep thinker on the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. He actually wrote an article for Harper's Magazine in 1953. That was possibly the first time anyone had publicly said that with so many, billion suns in the galaxy, the chances of there being life on other planets is overwhelmingly high, which I think is now it's widely accepted. But in the interview on this late night radio show, he made a couple of very interesting points. For instance, he said that if there was an alien race that decided to do a galactic survey, right, it would have trillions of planets to visit. And of course, any civilization has limited resources. So even if there are a large number of interplanetary civilizations doing this, it would still be a very infrequent occurrence for one of them to visit Earth. Even if, and that's if all of these civilizations are setting out to find life, if they have the same kind of curiosity that humans have. And of course, we can't guarantee that they do. We have no idea what they're like. So he also said that the Earth has existed for about 4.5 billion years, and we've been around for about 5,000 years as a kind of civilized species, in inverted commas. So that's just over a 10,000th of a percentage point of the whole time our planet has existed. And his point was that, statistically speaking, it's possible that aliens have visited Earth thousands of times, but that none of those visits have coincided with the period when we humans have existed. Now, I think that's a really interesting observation. By the way, Clark witnessed 6 different UFO sightings during his life, all in different places with multiple witnesses. And he said in each case, it was eventually possible to prove that the objects he saw weren't spacecraft. But he made the point that because he was kind of an eminent scientist, he had quite a lot of resources at his disposal. So he could go into laboratories and weather bureaus and so on, get data, use equipment. And of course, most people don't have that kind of access, right? So, but even with all of that, on one occasion he was actually fooled. He thought he'd seen a UFO, an extraterrestrial craft. It turned out to be a child flying a box kite in London at an unusually high altitude. Now, this is the author of 2001 and a professional astronomer. So, if this guy can be fooled, it does make you wonder about the reports of other people who don't have his training and, more to the point, his resources.
I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to mention a little bit about some of the videos that you can see on the internet. There's literally thousands of videos, UFO videos, and I think it's good to look at them. It's kind of interesting. I sometimes sort of look at them with my friends and we sort of say whether we think it's a UFO or it isn't. I don't think you can just look at every video, especially with the technology we have today, and just assume that it's real and assume that it's a UFO, for example. There's a lot of people out there hoaxing. They probably get some kind of kick out of doing that. But also, just a light in the sky that you don't know what it is, that's just not good enough for me anymore. I mean, it's got to be a bit more interesting than that. I've seen plenty of lights in the sky that I know probably aren't aeroplanes. I have seen a few things myself. I just wanted to quickly mention one of them, and if you've seen any, then go ahead and let us know. But
Sure.
I was near Wembley Stadium in the UK in a field, and I looked up, and there was 2 stationary lights in the sky, not far from the stadium, but much higher up in the sky, and they were completely stationary and sort of about the altitude of aeroplanes or higher, maybe. So it was nothing to do with the stadium, by the way. They were completely stationary. That's what struck me. They were way too high to be anything that could be, sort of considered to be at the top of towers or masts. They were way higher than that, and they're completely stationary. And I was looking up, and I just thought, what, is anyone else looking at this? And I stared at them for a couple of minutes, and they just stayed there, the same shape, quite big stationary lights in the sky. And as I watched, they just zipped away like they were graphics, like a graphic disappearing, like completely zipped away and disappeared in the space of half a second. So that's my. I mean, I've seen that. That's probably one of the ones that I've seen which I thought, wow, that really was kind of weird. I've seen other lights. What about yourself? Have you ever seen anything?
I had one experience where I did believe for some time that I was looking at something that might have been a craft, and it was a craft. It turned out it was a Zeppelin.
Okay, right.
But so that brought me back down to earth, so to speak.
And by this, I'm not saying that there aren't UFOs. I'm just saying that we need to discount, first of all the ones that could be discounted.
Yeah, I agree. But also, your mention of YouTube videos makes me think of the Marmara Sea sightings. I don't know if your listeners will be familiar with this, but over a period of a few summers in Turkey, which has a kind of a little internal sea, the Marmara Sea, there was some spectacular footage taken of what appeared to be the cockpit of an extraterrestrial craft. But you're right in saying, you look at those kinds of things nowadays and you immediately think, okay, how have they faked that? That was my immediate reaction. I'm looking at it thinking, that's amazing. God, how did they do it? So, yeah. But anyway, I also wanted to say, I think there's kind of a logical fallacy at the heart of some UFO beliefs, and I'm emphasizing the some. But to illustrate, think about Area 51. So, the US base in the Nevada desert, where it's been alleged that the military are testing alien craft. Now, we know that armed patrols and helicopter gunships have been spotted surveilling the perimeters of Area 51. People have been chased away and arrested and so on. And it seems that when employees there have tried to blow the whistle, the reaction has been pretty fierce. Former employees have said they were told that if they said anything too sensitive, their spouses and their children might not be safe. So we know there's a lot of secrecy surrounding that place. But see, here's the fallacy. Ufologists essentially say that, one, UFO technology would be cloaked in secrecy, And two, Area 51 is cloaked in secrecy, and therefore Area 51 must be housing alien technology. Now we know from our little study of logical fallacies that that's not a sufficient argument. That just doesn't add up. And it especially doesn't add up in this case if the US government really does have an extraterrestrial called J-Lo inside Area 51. I don't remember the name, but it sounds like J-Lo to me. The conspiracy theorists say there's an alien in there who's hanging around and like dispensing advice on how to reverse engineer alien spacecraft. So if they have that, yeah, they probably do want to keep that a secret. But if Area 51 is in fact a testing ground for advanced military aircraft, which is the official story, then all of the secrecy surrounding it would be equally justified. Yeah. So I'm not saying that Area 51 doesn't house alien spacecraft. I honestly don't know. But again, I feel like the ufologists are overstating that particular part of their case there, and I don't think we should be led down that path. We should try not to, go down the path of logical fallacy. Oh, look, it must be true.
I agree. I totally agree. We should apply logical fallacies to everything we're talking about. But that's the skeptical bit over now, Auntie. Let's get on to the belief in UFOs.
All right. Well, there are cases in which I don't think it's being overstated. I mean, I recently saw a documentary about the Zimbabwe school sighting, and three things struck me about that. The first one was how many people were involved, because it was essentially a whole school full of kids, right? And the second was how sincere their testimony seemed. I mean, these kids didn't seem like the product of 1990s style hypnotic regression therapy. They just seemed like kids who'd seen something weird in the playground, and third, how the adults involved, because all of the people present at the sighting were kids. But it struck me how the adults involved were really trying to downplay any elements of sensationalism. They were just honestly trying to understand what had happened to their students. And it's a fascinating case, I think. You've seen that doco, right? Or you know something about this, yeah?
I've seen it as well. I've only seen it once, so we both probably don't know enough about this topic to comment too much. But we both seen the documentary, and I was struck by, the kids definitely saw something. And yeah, as you say, the adults have tried to get a rational explanation as to what happened, but and they also sent in psychologists, I believe, later. And then another part of the documentary I found interesting, I don't know if you saw this, because I think there was two documentaries on YouTube. They interviewed these children years later to see whether they were still sticking to their story, and they were, basically. They still said it was one of the most amazing things they've seen in their lives, and it stuck with them. So I think they did see something. Now, obviously, children have active imagination, so you have to be a little bit careful. But something strikes me as they really did see something. And I was listening intently to what they said they saw. They saw some kind of craft land. One of them said that the creature that they saw, they referred to it as being black and with long hair. And one of them described the eyes, which were very much similar to the sort of alien grey kind of description, with the big, wide, almond-shaped eyes. So yeah, I found it very interesting anyway, and I think when you've got multiple witnesses like that, you've got to at least believe they think they saw what they saw.
Well, I agree to an extent, but back on the more skeptical side of things, I also wanted to mention something about the reliability of certain witnesses, and specifically the kind that are often called trained observers. Because our other guest today is going to talk about the Rendlesham Forest incident, right?
That's right, yeah. Gary Heseltine will be speaking to later on.
Okay, and the reliability of witnesses is a big issue in that particular case. So just to briefly run down the facts, Rendlesham is, I guess you could say one of the most high-profile UFO sightings ever in the UK. And it's been called Britain's Roswell. Yeah, that's right. But it was actually a series of sightings over 2 nights. And the first one was December 27th, 1980, and it was near an RAF airbase in Suffolk.
RAF Woodbridge, yeah.
Yeah. And that base was being used by the US Air Force at the time. So the first reports came from a security patrol. They saw lights apparently descending into the forest just near the east gate of the base. Yeah. So these guys thought it might have been an air crash. So the patrol went into the forest to investigate. And there they saw a glowing metallic object with coloured lights on it. Now, as they came closer to the object, they saw it moving through the trees, and they stayed there watching it for most of the evening. Then they went back the next day, and in a little forest clearing, they found 3 impressions in the earth, spaced in a kind of triangular pattern, and they saw burn marks on the surrounding trees. Then the following evening, on the 28th of December, the Deputy Base Commander, Charles Halt, visited the site with another patrol. While they were taking radiation readings and things like this, they saw flashing lights on the far side of a field, roughly where the security patrol had seen the lights the night before. Yeah. Now, the commander, Charles Holt, he recorded this incident on a dictaphone, I think, and he wrote about it extensively afterwards. He said these lights were star-like, and the brightest of them hovered for 2 or 3 hours. And periodically, this bright light just shot a beam down to the earth. But the media really grabbed hold of Rendlesham partly because it involved multiple sightings and multiple witnesses, and because some of them were military personnel, and these are not the kind of people you'd expect to be claiming they saw a UFO so much as the kind of people you'd expect to be denying the existence of UFOs. So it became a huge deal in the UK press, and to some extent in America as well. There were documentaries and books and so on. Now, to be honest, it seems to me there are a lot of elements of this case that are really open to question. I won't run through all of them because I'm sure Gary will talk about this at length. But I want to talk about one thing in particular, and I just want to say before I do, this guy Charles Holt, the main kind of witness, I suppose you could say, the deputy base commander, he's really been hauled over the coals. He staked his reputation on the fact that he really did see a UFO in an English forest, and his character's been skewered by the skeptics. And I don't want to add to that because I don't feel like he really deserves that. However, those people who believe the Rendlesham incident was genuine nearly always mention, as I said, the military credentials of the witnesses. And in fact, you hear this over and over again in second-hand UFO accounts. People say, this guy isn't some hick farmer, he's a trained pilot or he's a soldier. But unfortunately, the research just doesn't back up the idea that these are more reliable witnesses. In the 1970s, one of the foremost UFO researchers at the time was an astronomer called Alan Hynek. He was actually the guy who coined the term close encounters of the third kind. But in 1977, he published a book-length study, and it focused on the reports of trained observers. And basically, the study concluded that pilots, soldiers, and others make terrible witnesses. And it mostly did this by looking at acknowledged misidentifications, so cases where there was really no doubt that what people had seen wasn't a spacecraft. Hynek looked specifically at what kinds of people misidentified other objects as spaceships, and he found that both commercial and military pilots did so more often than, say, housewives or farmers.
Yeah, but no, if you're talking about UFOs, for example, the kind of people who are more likely to see a UFO would be pilots. So that's probably a bit disproportionate to sort of say, well, they were more common. I mean, you don't get so many housewives flying military aircraft.
Yeah, but he wasn't talking about the numbers. He was talking about the proportions. So he developed developed an idea called the misperception rate, and the most reliable witnesses had about a 50% misperception rate, where they thought they saw a spacecraft and actually they saw a star or something, right? Among military pilots, the misperception rate was 88%, and among commercial pilots, it was 89%, and that made them the worst category.
What's he saying? Like that they thought they saw a spaceship, but it was actually a plane?
Yeah, well, no, not a plane. He looked at what kinds of objects different people tended to misidentify, and he found that pilots could be relied upon to correctly identify ground structures and aircraft, but not other objects in the air. So anything that's in the air and not an aircraft, a pilot is not a reliable person to identify that object. And the reason for this, he speculated, was that pilots are very trained to be sensitive to anything which might pose a safety risk to their crew and their passengers. So if they see something in the air, they tend to react more strongly than average if it's an aerial object they don't immediately recognize.
I just wanted to counter just slightly, because one topic we may discuss at some point in the future is research. And it's really easy to read an article and then sort of say that, and then that can influence people to think that, say, pilots aren't as good at identifying things. But I think I don't know if I'd necessarily say that it's always good to respect the view of a pilot over other people, but it does weed out completely mad people, and I think that's the point. And as you mentioned before, it's often the case that military or the police deny events that other people who might be a bit more conspiratorial would say, oh yes, it's definitely this. Their emotions can run away with them, whereas policemen tend to stick to the facts, and they do have training. They're certainly more observant than I am when it comes to sort of attending an event and taking down the data. So I think they should be given some credence for that.
Well, I mean, that's our perception, and I think there are good reasons for that. And I also agree with you that, like a number, a percentage point doesn't really prove a point on its own. You have to look at other things. You have to look at, case studies and how these things have come about. I think this all has to be weighed against other factors, yeah. And as we discussed before the show, there are people like Charles Halt who come forward at great risk. And so there's probably a greater weight of responsibility on them to make sure they know what they're talking about.
Exactly. So, I just wanted to make a comment, and I'm sure you've looked into this a bit as well. I mean, some people said highlighted the lighthouse aspect. There was a lighthouse not too far away, and I think when people sort of say, a base commander or a deputy base commander saw this, I think the point is, it's not an advantage for his career to say this is a UFO. It would be much better for him to say, yeah, it could have been the lighthouse. It would be much easier and more beneficial to his career, and it'd just be so easy. The fact that he's not doing that, and by mentioning the police, well, I don't know about you, but I know the difference between a light from a lighthouse and a craft that has a physical shape and that can go below the canopy of trees, for example, which I think's been mentioned. I think the idea that this was a lighthouse, it just seems to be one of those things like, oh, it's a weather balloon kind of thing,
Well, I know what you mean, and I didn't mention the lighthouse for that reason. I also didn't mention so some of the lights that were seen were red, white, and blue, and then there was, several years after the incident, there was another officer who came forward and said, I pranked them. I turned my lights on behind the trees. I don't think that
sounds ridiculous, and so does the lighthouse to me. We should mention it because that we should definitely mention the skeptics' response. But I just think they're not very viable. Most people know the difference between just light coming from a lighthouse, and lights coming from a police car. That one's just laughable.
I agree. The police car one is silly. So, but look, I think so. On the one hand, we shouldn't discount this evidence, and we shouldn't disparage anyone who comes forward with evidence, because they do so at risk of their career, at risk of personal ridicule, and so on. But I also think we need to be cautious, and we need to I would say treat all evidence equally. So okay. Don't privilege someone who's a pilot, for example. If someone thinks they saw something and they're not clearly mad, then they saw something. There are some specific errors that are prevalent among pilots, right? There are probably also specific errors prevalent among other kinds of people.
There could be specific errors that people would find with bakers and with shopkeepers and with janitors.
I saw a baguette-shaped object flying.
Or I saw a sausage-shaped object. I happen to be a butcher,
So I'm saying, like, I think we should exercise equal caution regardless of who the witnesses are. And I also think that, in these cases, these witnesses are absolutely genuine in most instances, but we do need to be really careful not to follow the people who write about them down any rabbit holes.
Assuming there is potentially a cover-up for some of these things, if you were working for the government and you wanted to cover these things up, a pilot comes in, reports he's seen a disc-shaped object. Now, let's imagine the pilot sees a disc-shaped object with little lights around it, with a pod at the top, and he actually sees the person flying it, and he can see it's not non-human, for example. Yep. He sees that. He reports that to his base. It goes up the chain of command to the people who are covering up these events, and they say, Yeah, can you just say that we saw that the C-322 was flying in that area at the time, and that's what he saw, and then close the case.
I
Can
absolutely
you?
agree,
Yeah.
and look in the kind of Area 51 literature, there is often mentioned a kind of playbook. They had a book, I can't remember, about 38 different official stories.
Mm.
So whenever an incident happens, this has been alleged. When an incident happened that has produced some kind of reaction that they didn't want, they go, story number 17. So that's been alleged on a number of occasions. I don't know if it's true, but I think it's a plausible idea that there are stories that are just ready to go.
Mm.
However, look, I always think some of the most persuasive evidence is what Christopher Hitchens used to call evidence against interest. So the cases I'm talking about are cases which are no longer on the ufologist's radar because the ufologists are satisfied that they were misidentifications. And that's a very important point, I think. The ones that you're talking about are cases where the ufologists say, no, it's not explained, and the US military, for example, says, well, yeah, it is. It was a weather balloon. That's an entirely different situation.
That's the thing. Again, it's like surely we should listen to both explanations,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
then people can make up their mind. We can't just take at face value if someone. If I mean, if for example this guy does research on pilots and what they say they saw them, and then it's been they've shown to be bad witnesses. If there was a cover up, that's the kind of results you'd expect for after a cover up, isn't it?
Well, this is why I gave the credentials of this guy, because he was, as I said, he was one of the foremost UFO researchers of his time, and it would be very difficult for this guy to have been bought, quote unquote, without it being discovered. So I think that particular report I think is quite a persuasive piece of literature because of who wrote it and when and under what circumstances.
Surely a professional person who was, say, a disinfo agent, if they were good at their job, you'd expect them not to be discovered.
Well, we reached a point from which I can't argue.
No, but I sometimes think you need to bear that in mind because if that was your sole aim, your career, basically not
Yeah.
to be discovered, the only people you're ever going to hear about are the ones who failed dismally.
Yeah, that is true.
Before we listen to our guest, I just wanted to comment on another case which we haven't mentioned yet, which is Travis Walton. I know you may not have looked into this case too much, but basically these guys were working in a forest. They were kind of lumberjacks and forester working in forestry, and they'd finished for the day. They started driving home. They saw a light. They drove towards it. As they got close, they realized it was a craft, some kind of craft that was hovering near the ground in a clearing. One of them got out of the vehicle. His name was Travis Walton, and he walked towards it. The others thought he was crazy and called him to come back, fearing for his life. He admitted later he was a bit scared, but then he just wanted to see what it was. Basically, he went closer. At some point, a beam of light came down, and he was struck by this beam of light. It knocked him flying. The others, in fear, drove off. They decided after some time to go back. They were scared, but they decided they had to go back. They couldn't just leave him out there. So they went back. He was gone, basically. They drove back into town after searching for some time, and they reported it to the police. Now, obviously, the police wanted to take down their story, and their story was, as I just told, basically, that they saw a craft and he was struck down by it. And the police obviously didn't believe them, as a lot of other people might not at the time. They became a bit of a laughing stock in the town where they were, and it then became a bit more dangerous for them in that they were potentially accused of murder because the guy didn't turn up. Travis Walton was missing. I think he was missing for a total of 3 or 4 days, and then he made a call from a telephone box. Sort of from some distance away, and he was picked up, and he said he was taken inside this craft, and he explained what he saw inside the craft and what happened to him, and then a few days later he was released back found himself on the ground, and he's been on a lot of shows, and basically all these guys were given lie detector tests. I think there were 6 or 7 of them, and they were given lie detector tests. They all passed, including Travis Walton. So they all believe what they saw and what happened, and it's affected, their social status, how they're viewed by some people. They've been ridiculed. I think some of them may have lost their jobs. There's been put strains on their marriage. How do you account for those kind of situations?
I think it's very difficult to account for those kinds of situations. I think, the Travis Walton case is a very striking case. I think it's probably beyond the scope of this particular chat to talk about abduction scenarios. But I think there are many cases of alien abduction which are very questionable. And then there are others, a relatively small number, I would say, but still, there are some where, they do raise some very, very big questions which aren't easily answered, and I think this is one of them.
And I think the Rendlesham Forest case is another one of them. No matter what you say about the witnesses, I think you can still say that policemen, military guys, they're not completely crazy. They're just reporting what they see. And it's the multiple witness scenario, I think, is where you have to think, well, surely this actually requires an answer. It requires an answer because this would be a serious security breach if you've got a base, and Gary maintains that there's a possibility there was nuclear missiles on this base.
I've heard that too.
So surely this is something that should be investigated seriously and not just laughed away like a lot of people do tend to do, like talk about little green men and let's laugh about it. And
I'm not sure I agree with that last point. I think in a lot of UFO literature there is this complaint that people just ignored, and it's time for us to take it seriously and we can't ignore it any longer. It's not ignored. It's not.
I think it is. I think it is. It's ignored. Serious investigation of it is ignored. I mean, I've seen countless TV programs. In fact, Gary Heseltine, our guest, actually turned up on a mainstream TV program, and this is the kind. It was actually good of them that they almost took him seriously. But most TV programs, news, they'll report it in a certain way. It's usually a kind of very dismissive, little green men, laugh about it. The tone of voice of the presenter will change to sort of, let's say, we don't seriously believe this, but there's never serious investigations like you might see on a panorama documentary, for example. That's what people are talking about.
I don't know. I think if you go, for example, to a website like watchdocumentaries.online.com, and you go and you look at the documentaries, they're organized into categories, and conspiracies is usually the biggest category.
Yeah, no, but that's not what people are talking about. People are talking about mainstream media, news, the terrestrial television, not a documentary site where you can go and you can select that video. Of course, someone who dismisses UFOs won't select that video. They won't even go there. They won't click on the conspiracies section. They'll be looking at cooking for
slugs.
Yeah, cooking for slugs.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Fair point. So, where do we end up in this discussion? What's our view now?
So let's go and listen to what Gary Heseltine has to say.
Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do.
Help us find the truth in the news.
Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section, you'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us, we can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with the greatest enemy of truth is blind belief in authority on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size, just send us an email, we can sort it out. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com, and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand, basically. Use the code TRUTH1, you get a 10% discount and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you.
Gary Heseltine served in the RAF Police in the 80s and then spent more than 20 years in the British Transport Police. He was a detective constable for 18 years, and because of this he was an advanced police interviewer of witnesses and suspects, skills which do become very useful when it comes to analysing incidents such as UFO incidents. Gary launched an unofficial national database for police officers reporting UFO sightings, which I believe is still going.
Yeah.
Welcome to Truth Sentinel, Gary.
Thank you for having me on.
You're always welcome. Before we talk about incidents like Rendlesham Forest, I wondered whether I read that you had your own UFO experience many years ago. Is that how you first got interested in the subject? And can you tell us a little bit about what you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had several experiences throughout my life, sighting-wise, but my first sighting that kicked it all off, I used to think was 15, but it's actually now, because I met up with a friend from school I hadn't seen in a long time, through various girlfriends, etc., that we'd gone out with. We actually were able to work out, actually, it was the summer of 76, so it was actually when I was 16. And basically I was walking my then girlfriend home on what was a balmy summer's evening, one of those rare nights in the UK where all the stars are out, there's not any clouds, and it's a lovely warm night. We don't get many of those. And we were walking along a long narrow footpath, and on the left was my comprehensive school and fields, and on the right hand side was a huge allotment, and at that time there was no street lighting of any kind, so it was very dark once you got out by the school fields. In the distance there was a housing estate where all the house lights were on, electricity was on. Well, against the backdrop of these stars, we suddenly see ahead of us, about a 60-degree angle to our right, what I can only describe as a bright white light, no distinct shape, appearing to move very slowly, almost kind of a gliding quality, no noise whatsoever. But the interesting thing was that as soon as the light had gone past the path that we were on, if you can imagine a line of the path ahead of you, as soon as it went past that path and was then on our left of us, and we were then behind its flight path, the entire housing estate in the distance behind the area of the object's flight path was a power cut, plunged into darkness. Now, rightly or wrongly, my girlfriend at the time associated the light with causing the power cut. She became a bit distressed. We watched the light. It went further across the school fields, and then there was a second power cut of the rest of the housing estate, plunged into darkness behind its flight path, and it was steadily moving in the direction of where I lived, which would probably be about a mile away from the location we were at. And I had my cycle with me, so I said, get on the bike, get on the crossbar, I'm going to try to take a shortcut and get ahead of it, but first I'm going to drop her at the end of the alleyway, well, a couple of streets away from the alleyway. Literally didn't take long, her house was in darkness. I then got back on the bike and raced like mad back down the same long narrow footpath that led onto a road called Grange Lane South, turned right onto Grange Lane South, raced like mad. Now, all the time I'm racing through this, the area is in total pitch black darkness, not any electricity on anywhere. However, when I get to a corner near to my house that's still on Grange Lane South, that bent round to the left, I had this distinct view of, on the bend, it was darkness, beyond the bend, the electricity was still on in the housing, etc. So at the point I got to where I moved from darkness into light, I looked over my right shoulder and was able to see that I'd got ahead of the object, which was now slightly behind me, over my right shoulder. I went round two corners to Westerdale Road and then turned onto Baysdale Road, dropped my bike outside number 3 where I lived, and my parents were having supper, so it was probably 8:30, 9 o'clock. I rush in and say, come outside, I think there's going to be a power cut caused by this strange white light. They just look at me bemused, as you would. They don't get up. I run through the hall, into the kitchen, through the kitchen into the back garden, turn around to look back at my semi-detached house, just in time to see the light coming over my rooftop, It was now gained in altitude. I don't know why, but I put my arm up as if like I'm answering a questioning school. Put my arm directly up, arm straight up, and as soon as that object went past my arm, and then I was then behind it, the entire area was plunged into darkness with a power cut. Now, how the hell can I predict a power cut? It's ridiculous. So I realised that having moved to a second geographical position, that light must have had in some way an effect on the power grid, because how could I predict a power cut? And that's how I got into it.
And during your research, have you come across any other incidents like that where lights or UFOs have affected power in towns at all?
Well, in terms of validation, what was very odd was that the very first book that I got was by a very famous figure in ufology called Major Donald Kehoe. And in that book, it was his last of 5 books, but in that book there was a section that mentioned the New York blackout from 1965, where all the eastern seaboard for about 9 hours was plunged into total darkness through massive power cuts that never happened before, and that was apparently rumoured to be the cause of UFOs. UFOs were supposed to be the cause. Now, straight away there was that kind of validation to my own event that gave it some resonance for me. Now, ever since, there has been the odd incident, and there are certainly lots of cases where UFOs turn car engines off, headlights off, and as soon as the UFO moves, the lights come back on, etc. But I'm not aware of any mass power cut quite like the one that I had, or like the New York blackout.
Was there any official explanation for the one you observed?
Well, here's the thing, right? At the time, in 1976, we weren't on the phone, and the nearest phone was about a 7 or 8 minute walk away. So who do you contact? My parents would just put it down to coincidence. They're just busy getting candles to light while the power cut's on. It lasts about half an hour, then the power cut comes on. Now, because they put it down to coincidence, even though I thought it was odd, I didn't even check the local Evening Telegraph, Scunthorpe Evening Telegraph, and part of me wonders whether it would be an idea to actually go back to the archives and check probably the month of August of 76 to see if there was a reference to it. But as yet, I'm unaware. The only other kind of semi-corroboration I had was early on when I started to lecture on the subject. Somebody approached me after talking, and I didn't recognise him at first. His head was shaved bald, so I didn't recognise him. But it turned out to be somebody I knew, not that well, but was a friend from school. And he said, "I think I saw that." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he basically said, "Well, we'd been playing football in the street on a road that was kind of parallel to where it happened to me, but maybe 300-400 metres away, on a housing estate that I wouldn't be able to see." And he said, "We saw this object come over, going in the general direction you describe, and then the whole area had been plunged into darkness." And he said that was the summer of 76. But again, it's not good enough for corroboration, but it's maybe indicative that it might be a similar incident.
And nowadays, of course, with the internet, incidents like that will get sort of logged and shared by quite a number of people, so it's easier to kind of track these cases.
Yeah. I think it would be far easier now once the power came back on. That is, because don't forget, if the power goes down, and the phone lines probably would go down if it was some kind of effect, weather effect. Who knows, really? I mean, if there was some kind of EM pulse effect, for whatever reason, you'd lose all kind of power. So, electricity, you'd still have the internet via your mobile phones, etc. So that might be an option. But yeah, I think it'd be far easier now to keeping people informed.
And I saw you talking about Rendlesham Forest incident with Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby, and that skeptic guy. I can't remember his name.
Chris French.
Chris French. Yeah. Do you get frustrated with guys like Chris who dismiss the evidence with somewhat unlikely explanations, like the lighthouse?
Well, I think the reality is that ever since the 1950s, if somebody's interviewed about UFOs on a news program, for some reason they have to put up an anti-character who was a skeptic. It don't really happen in any other subject. If you had a discussion about ghosts, you don't have an anti-ghost person. If you talk about cookery, you don't have an anti-cookery person. Or if you talk about any other subject, you don't have an anti-person there. But with UFOs, you've got to, which suggests to me that there's a reason why. Chris French was getting paid a considerable amount of time to be the resident psychiatrist who would be there to effectively debunk or put a slant on everything. And literally, he said to me he'd have paid over 20 odd times at X amount of pounds each time. I wasn't getting paid; he was getting paid a lot, so he was the fool. But realistically, he was the paid skeptic. And the things that he quoted, especially in the second interview that I did on this morning program with Holly Willoughby, was he came out with the classic skeptics' names. And the reality is he's never been there, he's never talked to the actual witnesses, but this guy is brought on to downplay the significance of whatever UFO witness says. It's just a standard game that the BBC play and all the terrestrial channels play. They very rarely do any decent coverage of the subject. I've been involved in several documentaries over the years. In fact, in the last couple of years, I did one for Channel 4, one for Channel 5, where each time they approached me and I said, well, Channel 4 not got a very good record, Channel 5 not got a very good record of covering the subject fairly. I'll give you a world exclusive. Do you want it? Oh, yes, we want it. I said, will you put it in a final film? Yes, of course we will. We're interested. So I gave them the scene of where Charles Halt, Colonel Charles Halt, or Lieutenant Colonel at the time, had the beam sent down at his feet. I'd gone around with Halt and discovered which field it was. It'd never been shown on camera, and it's a world exclusive. And I said, are you going to put this in? Oh yes, it's going to. Was it in the final program, each one? No. And do you know why? Because if that was shown, it would completely demolish the lighthouse theory, which they like to keep bringing up. So sure enough, they don't mention it, and in each program, guess what? They mention the lighthouse theory. It's a classic done by omission so that they can get in the lighthouse theory, which is ludicrous. Always was, doesn't bear any resemblance to what the witnesses says, despite what Ian Redpath will say. The men are out there for 4.5 hours. If I came across a clearing, I might be scared as anything. But if I might be in the woods and I see something in the distance and it goes blink on, blink off, and then I go, oh, what's that? I'm scared. Oh, blink on, blink off. Oh yeah, what's that? Oh, blink on, blink off, with a regularity of every 5 seconds. I think even the most stupid person in the world, after a minute, would go, that's a lighthouse. But of course, not everybody can see that. But 4.5 hours, and it takes me a minute, or anybody a minute, to work out that that would be a beacon. This doesn't bear any resemblance to what the actual witnesses have said, and none of these people who claim to be skeptics have ever stood alongside the actual witnesses and debated it with them, because if they did, they wouldn't have a leg to stand on. It's ludicrous. All the things Halt would say, I knew where the lighthouse was. The men in the tower knew where the lighthouse was because it beams all the time. The men, whilst may not be familiar to traipsing through the woods, may have been surprised for a few seconds, but it wouldn't take you long to realise that was a lighthouse. And what they're describing, what Holt was describing, multiple objects to the north, multiple objects to the south, object coming towards us, it's stopping above our heads at 1,000 feet and putting a beam down to our feet like a laser beam for 15-20 seconds. Is that a flying lighthouse? I don't think so.
No, it doesn't sound like a very likely explanation. You worked in a similar position in an airbase to Rendlesham, right? Is that why you became involved with this particular case?
Yeah, I worked in the Royal Air Force Police for 3 of my 6 years of my service. Between 83 and 89, I served at 2 nuclear bases. One at RAF Honington in Suffolk, which is not a million miles away from Rendlesham. And then I served 2.5 years in what was then West Germany at a base called RAF Larbrook, near the Dutch border, near Venlo. And basically they were nuclear weapons areas, and they're exactly the same. And in fact, the one at Larbrook in its design is pretty much identical to the one at Bentwaters and Woodbridge weapons storage area. And I knew for a long time that there must be a lot more witnesses because of the amount of people that's involved in nuclear security. And the problem that you've got is, whilst Larry Warren, Adrian Bustinza, witnesses on the ground, airmen and sergeant have said there were nuclear weapons there. The problem is that senior officers who were there at the time, Halt and others, will not go public about that there were nuclear weapons there, for the simple reason is that at the time no nuclear weapons were supposed to be at base. So what you had in effect was a breach of all the armament agreements between the US and the UK, because there were nuclear weapons there that shouldn't have been there. Hence why I think the reasons UFOs turn up in the first place. I think it's an inspection at a time of world crisis. What do I mean by that? Well, in December 1980, and it's often lost in the Rendlesham story, deliberately I think by most program makers, is that at the time there were two major world events that were putting us almost to the brink of a third world war. One was the American hostage crisis, and two, more significantly, was the rise of the Polish shipyard workers under Lech Wałęsa and the Solidarność movement, which basically Poland was threatening to break away from what was then the Soviet Union. Now, historically, when any country had tried to gain that kind of independence, the Soviet Union would send in the troops and put the uprising down. Well, at the time of December 1980, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the borders of Poland, and this is why it's an extremely grave time. Now, if UFOs were interested in our welfare and thinking, oh, this might trigger to a third world Armageddon nuclear war scenario, then perhaps that's a good reason to suddenly realise that there are more nuclear weapons in the Bentwaters and Woodbridge storage area than anywhere else in Europe. That's what was told to me by a senior American officer. I'll leave you to work that out. But the reality is, if certain officers were to go public and confirm that, then you really would have a political hoo-ha in the national media. Well, I don't think anybody wants that. Certainly if you're America or Britain politically. I'd love to see that personally, but that's the real reason why I think UFOs were there, because at a time of world crisis, those nuclear weapons that shouldn't have been in the weapon storage area were there, and that potentially was a destabilising effect.
And what makes Rendlesham Forest incident particularly compelling to you? What other aspects of it?
Well, if you think about it, how often do UFOs appear on 3 successive nights? Well, we now know after 35 years that there are 3 separate nights of activity. First night, Penniston and Burroughs is the principal people involved who see the landed triangular craft or a craft that leaves ground indentations, various other physical trace marks. The second night is less well known, involves in the shift commander, Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin. That's been established not by her, who she's never gone on the record, but by the fact that there were various airmen and airwomen working who heard the radio transmissions of her. Something had been seen by the East Gate again by a witness called Laurie Bowen. She'd rang it in just like Burroughs and the night before, and basically it turned out that the shift commander, Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin, was already out on mobile, so she said, I'll go investigate. Well, the next thing apparently that they all hear over the radio is her screaming over the radio, help, help, help. And it then turns out Sergeant Bobby Ball is the first one to respond to her on mobile, and she's a quivering wreck. She has to be relieved from duty. This was confirmed by Colonel Halt himself when he came on the next day. That he didn't know exactly what had happened, but basically she'd been that traumatized by whatever she saw that she had to be relieved from duty. Now that's confirmed by various military witnesses, and then the third night is the night where Halt himself gets involved, and it's also the night of Larry Warren, and Adrian Bustinza, although the Bustinza is linked to Halt's group because he was part of that small team out in the forest. But Adrian Bustinza, who for many, many years had kept a low profile, quite unexpectedly really went public a few months ago to actually confirm that Larry Warren's account was essentially correct, or many aspects of it were, which was a complete contrast to what Halt has been saying over the last few years, that Larry Warren had made it up, had been messed with, etc., etc. I mean, I'd worked or collaborated for a 7-year period with Colonel Halt, but in the end I pulled the plug on it because he kept making unsubstantiated claims against Larry Warren that he was lying, blah, blah, blah. But he never gave any evidence to back up his claims. So that's, in a sense, would anybody like an uncorroborated amount of slurs? Well, that's what he did on at least 2 occasions. So I took exception to that and said, you're wrong. I actually believe Larry Warren, and many other people do. And then after this, Adrian Bustinza has come out and corroborated many of the things that Larry has said. So in a sense, I don't know where that leaves Halt, but it doesn't paint him in a good light. And far from being the senior officer who should be trying to pull everybody together and get other witnesses to come forward, he seems to have his own agenda. The more I knew him, the more he seemed to have a bit of an agenda. Now that surprised me, and I don't know what that agenda is, but he should be bringing people together and just accepting that all are a part of a very strange set of events. But I mean, going to the evidential side, from a detective side, how often do you get a piece of paper where the deputy base commander of what was a nuclear facility go on the record saying in 3 paragraphs, in the first paragraph that there was a landed triangular craft that was seen by some of his airmen, second that had left ground indentations, background radiation was increased up to 7 to 8 fold, and then on the third night seen, he himself said, I admitted that he'd seen multiple UFOs himself. You don't get those kind of documents by a senior officer. So he wrote, obviously, what is referred to as the Halt Memorandum, which I think is one of the top 5 UFO documents in the world because of his rank and in admitting that he was involved himself. And then when you look at it, that there was ground trace evidence seen, photographed. We have triangular indentations that weren't rabbit marks. Those remarks came about, that story comes about 6 weeks afterwards, when every man and his dog had walked through the scene and destroyed essentially the scene. But when it had been pristine, measurements were taken, they were equidistant to about 3 meters, sticks had been put in the ground marking the 3 indentations. Each of the 3 indentations were depressed to the same level, were of the same size and dimensions, as if something on a triangular platform had set down on the ground. There were broken tree branches in, I think, the Corsican pines, of where the object had risen up and broken through the branches, or had come down and broken through the branches, but there were tree branch damage. In each of the 3 indentations, the background radiation rose, which we now know to about 7 or 8 times normal background radiation. And this was confirmed to Nick Pope, of all people, who's pretty sceptical in my mind, but even to him, he did some digging and found that and confirmed and just released a document confirming that his research had confirmed that it was an increase by, I think, 7 to 8 times that of background radiation. So if you match the multiple testimony from over 3 nights, 3 different shifts, you have ground indentations, and you then have documentary evidence in that Halt Memorandum, plus what has also come out in recent years that nobody really mentions is that Robert Hastings, in his book UFOs and Nukes, managed to get 2 airmen who were in the actual air traffic control at the base at the time of the incidents over that Christmas period to go on record, be named, they're in his books, and basically they confirmed that they saw it on radar and that a UFO was over the base. And, you know, whilst they couldn't be certain of the exact date, which night it was, they confirmed that the object had been seen visually over the base and that it had been on radar. Plus we also had 2 brief radar contacts anyway that are historically listed. So when you add all that together, this is an amazing case. But I think when you put it into the political context of the time, I think that's why it's significant. And when we look at UFOs historically, there is a long link, I think, between UFOs turning up over nuclear power plants, nuclear bases, etc., over many years, over many countries. And at one point, which I forgot to mention, at one point, Halt sees one of the UFOs move towards the base. Now, he couldn't see it where it was shining the beam down. All he could see is the object going over the base and putting a beam down in what he described was in the general direction of the weapons storage area. However, he had access to a radio that could tune into the weapons storage area tower frequency, and as he turned it on, the tower confirmed that beams from the UFO were being shone down into the actual nuclear bunkers. And he actually went on video and confirmed that to me and said that there were other witnesses on the ground to that who were walking around in the weapons storage area. Now, if you'd never worked in nuclear weapons storage areas, you'd never know that there were at least 2 roving airmen walking around with machine guns, rifles, etc. Now, I would know that because having worked on those bases, I had done exactly that and know the layout of the numbers involved. On a normal conventional bomb dump, there's generally not really anybody, maybe 1 or 2 on guard for the conventional weapons. But when you look at a nuclear base, it's 24/7, 365 days a year. It's taken very seriously, and there are in excess of 30 to 40 people on shift. And guess what? When you look at the rosters for Rendlesham and Bentwaters and Woodbridge, guess what? There were 35 to 40 people on per shift, 4 shifts. So this was a nuclear base. Very easy to prove.
Yeah, I mean the radar certainly would show that it's definitely not a light from a lighthouse, wouldn't it? And presumably you've spoken to some of these witnesses yourself. Did you find them credible?
Oh yeah, I mean I met Halt, I've met Larry Warren, I've met John Burroughs, and I've met Jim Penniston, who were 4 of the very principal, the top 4 that's known historically. I've also know 2 of the principal researchers in Linda Moulton Howe and Peter Robbins, who's obviously co-authored Left at Eastgate with Larry Warren, and they're very credible people, and they've done lots of research, and this is just an incredibly telling case. And I think one of the things that's often missed is the fact that this case was never meant to come out. Holt certainly didn't want it to come out, and he, in fact, when he got told that the memorandum was going to be released, he actually tried to get it pulled, but he was unable to do so. He knew that it would change his life forever, and of course it did when it came out. But the reality is that was essentially to the wider world, nobody knew about it until October of 1983, when the News of the World did a big splash on it. UFO lands in Suffolk, classic headline kind of thing, and showed the Halt memorandum and a photograph of Halt. It was a massive, massive story. But for almost 3 years, nobody knew about it, apart from local villagers, local witnesses, and the buzz around the town. And a few of the researchers over that interim period, UFO researchers, had got wind of something going on, but not to the extent. And really, it was only until October 1983 when it really hit the world headlines, and we began to learn a lot more about it. So this, again, is a really good reason to think that everything that's come out is real, in the sense of it was never meant to come out, and it did, almost by accident. And Larry Warren was the person who set in motion that chain of events that led to the Halt memorandum being emerging and being released in the News of the World. For that we have to be eternally grateful.
Yeah, with the beams of light coming down, that's typical of Rendlesham Forest incident, also the Zimbabwe school incident, and the Travis Walton case. I think there's something about when a witness says they saw a beam of light coming down. I think that's where the skeptics sort of start to think it's not true, because they think of the old movies with the beam of light coming down and little green aliens. What do you think it is about that aspect of it that people find hard to believe?
Well, what you've got to, the reality is that beams of light have been seen in many cases around the world, and are shone down. I mean, I can think of a police case off my police database where a beam comes down the width of a football field, and it seemingly scans the terrain for about 5 minutes. It just blinks on. It's there. Huge big craft is seen by 3 police officers. Just blinks on. It didn't arrive. It didn't come down. It didn't come left. It didn't right. It just blinks on like the turn of a light bulb, and then it shines a beam down as if it's scanning the terrain for about 5 minutes, and then suddenly, like turning a light bulb off it goes. No noise whatsoever. So I mean, beams are seen often in many cases, but when you have multiple witnesses all describing the same thing, I find it very insulting when skeptics who don't know these people, haven't actually spoken to them direct, just come out with a very convenient, oh well, it can't. Stanton Friedman describes it best when he says it can't be, so it isn't. That's the mindset of the skeptic. It can't be, so it isn't. So they have to come up with any kind of implausible. Some of these excuses that they come up for sightings without ever meeting the witnesses are absolutely bizarre. But because the media is biased in this subject, they're allowed to get away with, in a sense, blue murder. When you actually zone in on what they're saying, their skeptical arguments don't stand up to scrutiny, and unfortunately we don't have a Jeremy Paxman type referee who can say, well, you know, you're in the Labour Party, you said that in 2006, and you, the Tories, you said that and that. We don't have any natural referee because the subject is ridiculed in the media. If we did, then the skeptic arguments would quickly dissolve.
Yeah, and a lot of cases aren't even discussed much in the media. You have to kind of search them out yourself. I mean, the kinds of cases I'm interested in are the Travis Walton case, Phoenix Lights, Rendlesham Forest, the Zimbabwe school incident, because as you said, they all have multiple witnesses.
Yeah, they're the best. They're the best cases, and especially where you have witnesses seeing things from different geographical positions, all are looking at the same time. Like there's some police cases that I know. I can think of one case near to where I live where I think 6 to 8 officers were involved. At least 4 saw a huge cylindrical object near a TV mast, just hanging motionless next to it from 4 different vantage points. And they all gave statements, etc., etc. So when you get independent corroboration like that, then clearly something is there. What you then have to determine is what that object is and what kind of movements it makes. Well, in the case of many UFOs, they kind of have characteristics that are way beyond what we know of aerodynamics. For example, instant acceleration, instant stop. If you're a car, you have to gradually accelerate. Well, not according to genuine UFOs, ET, I think. They can just go from point A to point B in a blink of an eye. Instant acceleration, instant stop, right angle turns, reversals in flight, ability to go instant vertical high-speed ascent and high-speed vertical descent, and also render themselves visible and then in the next moment invisible, and then most of the time UFOs make no noise. There is some reports low hum at close proximity, but generally no noise. Now they're the general characteristics of what I think are ET, and now we can't do that. We can't make right angle turns. In the Belgium sighting, classic F-16 chase over Belgium, I think the night of 31st of March 1990, 2 F-16 chase, a radar confirmed, visually seen on the ground at the start of the event, tracked on 7 independent radars for 75 minutes. They get multiple lock-ons, the object breaks the lock-ons. At one point the object makes a manoeuvre that pulls 35 Gs, all confirmed on telemetry data that you could print out and put before a court, a jury, in that hypothetical type of scenario. And 35 Gs, that's 3 times of what we know of stealth now, 11 to 12. So this is an object that's performing manoeuvres way beyond anything we can do. Now, unfortunately, these kind of best cases do not get sufficient airtime on mainstream. They do get airtime on satellite channels, Sky, etc., on cable, but mainstream UK terrestrial television channels do not represent or present the best evidence, and I think that's deliberately loaded that way. And Britain, following America's lead, is one of the most secretive governments in the world on UFOs. Despite what they say about, oh, we're open and transparent and we'll released all our documents. Well, the reality is they said that they'd released everything, even though most researchers realised it was only low-level correspondence. There was one or two good cases in there. However, as most researchers believed, that there was a lot more information. Well, they said, no, our public release is now done. And then I think end of last year, one of the witnesses from Rendlesham Forest, John Burroughs, actually got an admission that there was 18 policy files on UFOs that still hadn't been released. And through Freedom of Information Act, he's been told they will be released probably early in 2016. But these have been known about, and they come as a complete contradiction to what they publicly said when I think the last batch came out in 2012 of the British files. So they've been lying to us all along. I wouldn't trust the Ministry of Defence one iota on the subject of UFOs.
Yeah, and as you said, the media very rarely cover the subject properly. I mean, you don't often see a panorama program covering UFOs. It's usually a topic that's ridiculed. In the case of Travis Walton, the witnesses took lie detector tests, and I wondered, as a former policeman, how accurate or how useful are lie detector tests?
Well, they're not used in the UK, so I'm not an expert in them, but they're used widely in the USA and are allowed in prosecutions. And Travis Walton, I think, took at least 2 lie detectors and passed them, as did many of the other loggers as well. I met Travis Walton in 2010 in America, and he's just a normal guy who just got caught up in something absolutely bizarre. And don't forget that, and interestingly, what he said about the film that was made of his story, Fire in the Sky, with James Garner, I think D.B. Sweeney, I think 1993, quite a good film as it is as a UFO film goes. And he said the stuff on the ground with the actors and the loggers and recreating the scene up to it, and afterwards he'd had his encounter, was pretty accurate. He said, but Hollywood took over, and his experiences of being abducted were nothing like were portrayed on film, which is a shame. But I think Travis Walton's very credible. He's just a normal guy. He's no axe to grind. He's not a superstar seeking fame. He's just a normal guy who got caught up in something very strange. And on that note, I might want to say to your listeners that UFO Truth Magazine, the magazine I founded 2 years ago, has held 3 annual conferences. Well, the 4th one, which will be in Holmfirth in West Yorkshire next year, 10th and 11th of September, the guest is none other than Travis Walton. So he's coming as the headline speaker to speak in West Yorkshire 10th and 11th of September next year.
Oh, great. Will you be videoing that as well?
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, it'll be videoed. I will interview him separately on like a one-to-one Parkinson in front of the audience for an hour, and then he'll do his main presentation on the second day. So that's how it's worked with the recent conference we just had. It worked well, where Stanton Friedman, the legendary nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, was the headline speaker at the 3rd annual conference in Holmfirth that's just gone in September, along with AJ Javad and various other speakers from around the world. So they're very popular, and it was a sold-out event. I think it'll be sold out again because certainly a lot of people will be keen to meet Travis, who I'm not sure has spoken in the UK, maybe once before, but a long time ago.
And what's the aims of your UFO Truth magazine?
To simply do that, to tell the truth. It's not about making loads of money. In fact, what I say in the mission statement of the magazine is it's an easy 96-page bi-monthly e-zine sent directly to your email address. I send it to you, so it's a personal service. You don't have to do anything. Is basically, I have got over the 13 years of my UFO active research from launching the police database in January 2002. I've met pretty much all the top people in the world research-wise, and when I had the idea for the e-zine, I approached many of those people I respected, I'd met, and said, would you write either as a regular columnist or as a guest contributor to the magazine? And they all said yes. And so we've had all the top people write, and we have incredible regular columnists from all around the world writing regular articles. Now, those kind of people know their subject and have been studying it often 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. Stanton Friedman's actually the latest person to come on board with, he's just written his first article for the magazine, and he's going to be a regular columnist. Every 2 months he'll be sending articles. So we have some quality people, and the idea is to tell the truth. But like I said in the mission statement, one of the main things that shouldn't be forgotten is I automatically ring fence 1/3 of all monies coming through yearly subscriptions for UFO causes. And what I said was initially that would be the financial trigger mechanism for conferences. It would fund conferences. Well, that's already happening, but it also, as time goes on, I've made various donations to UFO causes and research, and as time goes on, I think that will happen more and more. So how many people, if it was all about money, how many people would give away 1/3 of their profits straight away for UFO causes? I don't think any other business would do, but I'm about trying to spread the message. I don't particularly want to reach the people who are in a UFO audience. I want to reach the people on the street, the ordinary man on the street, the man or woman on the street, and say, actually, you're not being told everything by your news media, and here are some facts. And so UFO Truth is really about trying to tell the truth as best we can against a very biased media.
Hopefully we can help you get the message out a bit. Well, can you tell us the website addresses that people can find out more details?
Yeah, the magazine website is www.ufotruthmagazine.co.uk.
And for the police website as well?
Police website is PRUFOS, which is PRUFOS, Police Reporting UFOs, all written as one word. So PRUFOS, Police Reporting UFO sightings.co.uk.
Brilliant. Sadly, we've run out of time today, but thank you very much for joining us. It's been interesting chatting to you, and hopefully come back at some point in the future.
Yeah,
as well.
Anytime you want, Scott. You let me know, and we'll have a debate on this again.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary.
All right. Bye.
Goodbye.